This video is going to tell you about the grid method. So you probably have already been working a little bit with drawing, and maybe you've done the shading and the first pencil intro, and now you're ready to move on to some more advanced drawing. So this is going to show you about the grid method. So this will be particularly useful if you're interested in doing the mural painting that's going to go in the cafeteria. Or this will be very useful if you want to do the portrait project that Ms. Bell suggested for Character Day. So the first thing you're going to need to do if you are practicing with the grid method is you're going to need to print a photograph. So I've printed some photographs that go along with the Black Panther breakfast program that show how food brings us together. So this is a picture of a young African-American girl in Oakland who was taking part in the free breakfasts that the Black Panther provided in the 1970s. And so I really like this because it shows how this group was trying to bring about social change and give back to their community. All right, but you might have a different picture that you're going to choose. You can print it. You can talk to the printer captain, get it printed, or you can use one of these if you're interested in really advancing with the mural project. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is after you have your picture printed, all right, you need to measure your picture to see what increments you're going to divide it in. So my horizontal is 7 inches long, and here it is 11 inches tall, or so 7 inches wide, 11 inches tall. Notice on this ruler that there is a 0 to 6 and then a 0 to 6. Use the side that's 1 to 12, okay? Otherwise people get confused. Okay, so that means that I can divide this into 7 equal units wide. So I'm going to do 7 inches wide, and I'm going to do 11 inches tall. So here's what I'm going to do. And I'm not going all the way to the edge of the paper because my picture doesn't go to the edge of the paper. I'm going to put my ruler at this part of the paper where it actually starts, okay? It's going to be different for every picture. I'm going to put a little tick at every inch mark, okay? Now see, I put a tick at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now you should stop and do this with your paper. Now even if your paper is not 7 inches wide, you decide how wide your paper is going to be. Then I'm going to come to the top, and I'm going to do the same thing at the top. Remember, I'm starting at the same point, okay? So I'm starting at the edge here of the picture. It might make sense for you to start at the edge of the paper in general. If you have a question about that, come talk to me. Then I'm going to connect each one of these lines. So I'm going to take the ruler and I'm going to connect the bottom line with the top line, and I'm going to draw a line vertically up and down. Vertically means up and down, so that I have these lines that go across the whole photograph, okay? After I do the vertical lines, I'm going to do the same thing with the horizontal lines. Now remember, I decided I'm going to make these squares 1.5 inches tall and 1.5 inches wide because that's what works with my paper. You might have a different measurement depending on your image, okay? So now I need to do it this way. So now I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to make 11, and for me it makes more sense for this time to do it along the paper because that's my equal measurements. So tick 1, 2, I'm going to make a little mark on each inch on this side of my paper, and then I'm going to make a little mark of each inch on this side of the paper. All right, then I do the same thing that I did the first time. Okay, I'm going to take my ruler and connect the two lines just like this. Okay, so that at the end of this, what I'm going to have is one large grid. Grid is basically lines that are intersect or cross that are going up and down, which is vertical, or right to left, which is horizontal. Okay, so now I've got this grid. All right, what this is going to help me do when I finish it is break up the picture in little bitty squares so that I can draw the picture, not the whole thing at once, but I'm going to draw each individual square, and that's going to help me draw the picture accurately. Okay, so here I've got a grid on the photograph. Now it's time to grid your drawing paper. Now for the photograph I used a marker because I wanted to be able to see it. For the paper I'm going to use a pencil, and I am going to do it as light as I can. As light as I can and still be able to see it. Make sure you don't have any marker on your ruler. Now for this paper, if I'm using the same size paper, I'm going to use the same size squares. If I'm trying to make it bigger, I'm going to multiply the size of the squares. So for example, let's say I wanted to do this, but for like the mural that we're going to create, it's actually going to be quite big. So we would have the same amount of squares, but we would make the squares each square would be 4 by 4 inches, okay? For the purposes of this, I'm just going to do the same amount of squares that are the same size until you learn how the grid method works, okay? So I do the same thing that I did before, all right? Mine was 11, I think. Let's see, let me just check. Yeah, mine was 11. Okay, this paper's a little bit larger, so I have to make sure so I don't confuse myself that I'm using the same amount of squares and for this purposes I'm doing the same size. So I'm just making a tick for 11. All right, I made 11 ticks there, and I made 11 ticks here. Okay, now this is the same thing you're going to do for the other one, except now you're going to connect the lines lightly with the pencil. So when you get finished, you are going to have, in fact, I'm not even doing it as lightly as I could, but try to make it as light as you can. So now I'm making my grid here. So I'm connecting all my horizontal lines, and next I'm going to connect all my vertical lines. So we're going to have one video that's going to show you how to set up the grid, and then I'm going to have the next video that's going to show you how to actually use the grid once you have it set up, okay? So this video is pretty much done. I'm not going to do the whole thing. Well, maybe I will because some people get confused. Okay, so I'm going to do the whole thing. All right, so now I've got my horizontal lines. All right, now you're going to do your vertical lines. So I did an inch that way and I connected them. Now I'm going to come here and make the ticks horizontally so that I can make the lines vertically. Okay, I had 7. I only had 7 inches, so I'm not going to make 8. I'm just going to make 7, and this is going to be trimmed after we finished drawing the grid. Okay, so you could probably, if you're doing the grid method, a good goal for the day would be to set up the grid, would be like almost maybe even a whole class period just to get this grid set up, unless you're fast. Some people are fast. I've done this a lot, so I can kind of do this really quickly. All right, or you can, I would suggest just doing it along with the video. All right, so now once you finish your lines, you should have your grid set up. It should look something like this, so that you have the same amount of squares that are the same size on a piece of white paper. Just come to me to get the white paper and your photograph. Now you're ready to actually, so once you have something that looks like this, now you're ready to start using the grid method to draw it. This is just the first video of setting up your grid.